There's been a lot of excitement talking about the Adeptus Mechanicus following Engine War, so let's have a bit of a discussion about starting an Admech army. Hello and welcome to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So in today's video we're talking about starting Adeptus Mechanicus. In the video we'll talk about reasons that you might want to start collecting Admech, general principles when it comes to collecting a Warhammer 40k army, what sort of units I would recommend going for when collecting the faction, and a couple of small tips when buying, and then touch briefly on the different rulebooks available to the Adeptus Mechanicus and which ones I think are more worth it. A fair bit to discuss then, so let's jump straight in with why you'd want to collect Admech. So I think the main draws to most Warhammer 40k armies are their lore, their background and their rules. The Adeptus Mechanicus is certainly a very compelling faction in 40k, a shadowy cult of machine worshippers who both combine the best of the technology that the Imperium has to offer with dogmatic worship and religious practices. They'd long been part of the background in Warhammer 40k without having an army of their own, and they're quite a recent addition comparatively to Games Workshop's roster. Pretty much everything in their army is about replacing the weak flesh with stronger machinery, whether that's augmented Skitarii infantry, lobotomized servitors carrying heavy weapons, various steampunk hovercraft or flying machines, or ancient relic battle automata. Rules-wise, in 8th edition they've just been getting stronger and stronger. They've not been particularly top tier for the vast majority of 8th edition, mainly just because their units were a little bit overcosted and not quite as flexible as what some of the other factions had to offer. Chapter Approved has been kind to them with points cuts though, and they now have some very valid melee and shooting options, whether that's dragoons or electro priests tearing you up in close combat, or some very scary shooting castles that you can now build, particularly with some of the scary buffs that you can get from the Engine War book. Miniatures wise, I'm a real fan of the Adeptus Mechanicus line. They're pretty much exclusively relatively recent plastic kits, and disturbing fused infantry that are half man and half machine. That does unfortunately come with a downside though. Admech is certainly one of the more expensive armies that you can collect in Warhammer 40k at the moment, with the unfortunate combination of their kits both looking very nice, being relatively recent releases, and also the points cost having dropped a fair bit, meaning that they're now not particularly good in terms of amounts of pounds spent for amount of points put on the board. So just be aware that they aren't one of the cheapest factions that you can collect in the game right now. I'll just quickly run through my general principles when buying a 40k army. Generally start small, one step at a time, a few boxes or a few units at the same time at most. Unless you're a real veteran of the game and are absolutely certain that you're going to put a lot of time and effort into the project, it's just not worth buying absolutely tons of units, then either realising that you're not all that into the project, or getting burnt out with the painting and wind up selling a lot at a big loss. Generally there's just not much to lose just by taking it bit by bit, so I wouldn't buy it all at once. Usually it's best to start from cheaper core units, such as things like this Tech Priest Dominus, and the core Skitarii Rangers and Vanguard troops. They're very likely to be relevant in most iterations of the army, and they're just likely to be a bit more resilient to rules changes than some of the more specialist stuff. If you have discounters in your area, such as Element Games in the UK, that I do have an affiliate link for down in the description below if anyone's interested, then it's a perfectly reasonable idea to use them. Warhammer is expensive, and saving 10 to 20% over that standard cost is a pretty decent idea. As a slightly more recent army, there's going to be a bit less of the Admech stuff around in pre-owned or on eBay and things, but that's certainly not to say that it doesn't exist at all. If you can find any of these newer kits pre-owned, then you are likely to save a decent amount compared with buying them straight from Games Workshop or a discounter, and possibly even more so if someone in your local area is selling an Admech army. Finally, be aware that all rules considerations will change with the game. It is a living rule set, and of course we're getting a new edition in the near future. We know that the codex won't change immediately, at least not at first, but it sounds like they are going to be redoing the points cost with the 9th edition rules in mind, and this could very easily change what sort of units in the Admech army are optimal. If you do have any big war gear choices to make, it might well be worth either saving the gluing of them until 9th edition is known, or think about using magnets, which can give your army flexibility to trade out different weapon options into the future and be a bit more resilient. So if we're talking about a few actual units to consider then naturally start collecting Adeptus Mechanicus is very good value. When Engine War came out, Games Workshop has redone the start collecting Admech box in a slightly subtle way, trading out a couple of options. They both cost £60 in the UK or $95 in the US, but going forwards the one on the left is going to be far harder to get your hands on than the one on the right. The older box has an Onager Dune Crawler and a Tech Priest Dominus in it, whereas the newer box has a Scorpius transport or tank that you can build as either one of them and a Tech Priest Engine Seer rather than the Dominus. For me, I think that the new box is actually slightly better for more experienced Admech players who already have quite a lot of units and might have already acquired themselves some onagers over the years. Getting the new Scorpius transport or tank discounted is really quite a decent deal, as it's quite expensive to add to your army otherwise. From a newer player's perspective though, I don't think that the new box is inherently quite as good value as the old one. The main difference being that the Dominus, which is a quite powerful HQ choice and costs around about 80 points, is replaced by the far more junior Engineer, who's still a core model but quite a lot smaller and only about 30 points. I'd say that the Onager Dunecrawler and Scorpius Disintegrator are pretty much equivalent. Basically, if you're a completely new player to the faction and you can somehow find the old box somewhere, either at a local gaming store or online somewhere for the same price, then it is probably a better pickup than the new one in my opinion. In terms of amount of money for the amount of models that you get, the new box is still one of the better deals in the faction though. At least on paper, if you bought the 3 sets in the box separately, then it will cost you £92.50, whereas the £60 price means it's sort of a 50% discount if you wanted those 3 units. And they're also good units that you wouldn't mind having multiples of in an Admech army. But honestly, compared with quite a lot of the other start collecting boxes, it's really not all that many points for the amount of money that you spend. If you built them in the cheapest way that you could fill the models, then you'd literally only be getting something like 170 to 180 points worth of models in this box, which is quite a bit less than most other start collectings. Outside of those start collecting boxes, I think that in general Admech are a faction where you can be kind of guided by what sort of things you like, as most units in the army have a pretty decent tactical role. With the right build and support and maybe a delivery mechanism, pretty much every unit in the codex can work to some extent, which is quite nice as a collector, as it's good not to have to choose too hard between the units that you like the look of the most and the ones that are most effective in game. As I said previously, I typically want to start with some of the more core HQ choices, the Tech Priest Dominus, maybe the Tech Priest Manipulus, and some Rangers or Vanguard, which I think will be useful in pretty much most Admech armies. From there are different options that are either going to give you more value in terms of gameplay strength, or if you're just trying to field as big an Admech army as you possibly can from a small amount of money. In terms of stronger units, I'm really quite a fan of the Scorpius Disintegrators, Cattle from Battle Servitors, Onager Dunecrawlers, Castellan Robots, and Sindonian Dragoons. That is a bit of a personal preference though. As I said, the vast majority of the units in the army are at least functional, and can be downright nasty in the right circumstances. In terms of core units, I think that probably some of the weakest that the Admech have to offer at the moment are the Transvector Transport, sadly only having a transport capacity of 5 and not having any real firepower. Just puts it at a lot worse competitively than the Fusilier and the Stratoraptor for me. And the Scorpius Dune Riders are a bit more efficient of a transport in my opinion, just because they carry 10 models. I think the Rust Stalkers are one of the units that's also in one of the hardest places at the moment. Their melee just isn't amazing point for point, and that's literally all they can do, unlike the Infiltrators who can also lay down a reasonable amount of shooting. They did get a stratagem that allows them to outflank on the first turn though, so even they do have some interesting tactical options available. Looking outside of gameplay and having a look at things that will get you the most bang for your buck in terms of pounds invested to points on the battlefield, as best I can tell, I think that Belisarius Call actually gives you the biggest bang for your buck because he's got quite a lot of points and doesn't cost all that much in money compared with some of our other units. Of course that will be tying you into the Mars Forge world, although that's not a bad thing at the moment as it stands in the game. In terms of money invested for points on the table, then other particularly good ones are the Castellan Robots, who can potentially put you 210 points on the board with those Phosphor Blasters, plus you also get the Data Smith in the box as well. Plasma Catatrons are pretty good as well, and can be devastating in game in the right combinations, and sort of loosely affiliated with the Codex are the Imperial Knights, whose datasheets will appear in the Codex, and you can get some good synergies with Knight of the Cog to allow your Imperial Knights to access Canticles of the Omnissiah, which is a really interesting combo in the Admech army. They're pretty good value as well in terms of money invested for points out. If you're looking to save money as well and weren't picking up the start collecting box, it's worth noting that the standard Tech Priest Engineers are also available for £10 from Games Workshop if you're happy to buy the metal kit rather than the more recent plastic one. If literally all you wanted to add to your Admech army was one more of these, then I'd definitely consider it at that price because it's £10 versus £20 for the plastic one. Unfortunately, outside of these units, it can get really quite expensive in terms of pounds for points. Unfortunately, none of the new releases are particularly good value in terms of pound per point ratio. That's the Archaeopters, the Cavalry, and the Taraxii, with the Cerberus Raider Cavalry being particularly bad and one of the worst units probably in the whole game of 40k, I suspect, in terms of amount of money invested for points on the table. It is a bit of a shame, as I do really quite like the new series. Other fairly expensive ones are Dragoons and Iron Striders, the Infiltrators and Rust Stalkers, and the Electro Priests, as all of these guys cost £30 and you only get 5 models in the box. I do find it quite interesting that from both a fairly competitive and also money per point ratio, Belisarius Call and Castellan robots is actually really not a bad shout at the moment, and could be a cheap way to add quite a strong formation to your Admech army. Finally, let's talk briefly about rulebooks and publications. Generally the main book that you're going to need for Adeptus Mechanicus is of course Codex Adeptus Mechanicus, which came out towards the start of 8th edition. It has the vast majority of rules that you need for the army, and I'd definitely consider this the first purchase to make when you're getting into Admech. Bear in mind though, Games Workshop will always have updates for the army planned in the future. They have confirmed that they're going to be redoing everyone's codexes throughout 9th edition, and we've got no guarantee at all when Admech might be redone next. I strongly suspect we'll see 9th edition drop within 2 months' time, and from then the codex cycle begins afresh. We have no idea whether Adeptus Mechanicus are going to be one of the earlier ones or one of the later ones to be redone. They're in quite a weird situation, as their codex is one of the oldest out of the ones that are available, but also their Psychic Awakening update and Engine War has literally only just come out, so if they did redo the Admech codex, I strongly suspect they'd be pulling in the bits from Engine War, and I'd be surprised if they want to make Engine War redundant quite so soon after it came out. In any case, Codex Adeptus Mechanicus isn't the worst pickup at the moment, and you are going to need it if you're playing Admech. I'd say the next biggest priority on the list would be Psychic Awakening Engine War. In terms of rules, this has got the rules for the Archaeopters, the Tech Priest Manipulus, and the Taraxii and Cerberus units for the fast attack. It also has a bunch of new stratagems, Holy Order Warlord traits, unique Forge World dogmas, and Forge World specific canticles of the Omnissiah. Some of the Psychic Awakening books are a little bit of questionable value to any given faction, but this one really is quite a decent update to the Admech, and I think would be a reasonably worthwhile pickup, but definitely as a secondary purchase after the core codex, and definitely not something that you need to add to the army right away. You could very much wait and collect Admech for a bit, and maybe add it when you're wanting to add in some new options to the army. Next we have the Vigilus Defiant supplement book, which gives the Adeptus Mechanicus a couple of formations. These ones help out the Catephron Battle Servitors and the Castellan robots, and just give them a few more extra rules of options. Unlike Engine War, this really is a bit thin on the ground in terms of worth buying a whole book for, particularly as a quick Google search for these formations will give you all their rules on just 2 sheets of paper, so I wouldn't personally recommend picking up Vigilus Defiant myself. Finally, Chapter Approved 2019 has updated points costs for the Admech, so it's technically kind of necessary at the moment to play them in 40k, but I would hold off on this because they said they're going to be redoing the points cost in 9th edition, and I'd just wait to pick up the 9th edition rulebook if you don't already have Chapter Approved. So I hope that's at least been some sort of helpful discussion as to the collecting of the Servants of the Omnissiah. If there's any more experienced Admech players watching, then please feel free to share any nuggets of information that you think are important. I'll certainly be interested in having a read over the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe for more Admech content coming over the next couple of weeks. It's going to be interesting to have a look at some of the individual units in the faction. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention my Element Games affiliate link, which is down in the description below. Basically, Element Games is a discount retailer for Warhammer 40k in the UK. They give 10 to 20% discount off Games Workshop products, and if you order through them after clicking the link in the description, a little bit of the money goes to help support Auspex Tactics, while not costing you any more when you buy something. So if you were thinking about ordering in some miniatures over the internet over the next few weeks, it can be a way to help support the channel without necessarily costing you any more at the point of the sale. I do have a similar link for Amazon for the USA and Canada. Again, Amazon stock the vast majority of Games Workshop's products, so if you were thinking about ordering in some miniatures in the USA, you can click the Amazon link in the description, and then any Amazon purchases whatsoever in the next 24 hours, a very small amount will go to Auspex Tactics to help support the channel. Again, can be a way to say thanks for the vids, even if you're buying something completely different to 40k stuff. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.